Every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the kind of world you want, is a quote by Elena Cvetanoska, who is a sustainable food advocate. But I think her quote can imply many different things in our everyday life. We are voting every day and we don't realize how much our votes matter in the long run. I want to focus on the way we vote through fashion, especially fast fashion. Fast fashion is basically cheap clothing produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trends. We might not think twice before buying a trendy, cheap piece of clothing from a big brand, but there are a few problems with this. Number 1. According to Elena Cvetanoska, head of the Consumption and Production Unit at the UN Environment Programme, the fashion industry is responsible for around 8% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. This is because the fashion industry relies on hard coal and gas to generate electricity and heat. And if this continues at this rate, it is expected that by 2030, the greenhouse gas emissions will rise up to 50%. Also, transporting the clothing from where it is made to where it is sold also means more pollution. Number 2. All of the fabric that isn't used, all of the clothing that isn't sold, and all the clothes that we throw away from our own closets all end up in landfills. And it is estimated that a lorry load of clothing ends up in landfills every second. Number 3. The fashion industry is responsible for around 20% of the world's wastewater, and around 7,500 liters of water are used to produce just one single pair of jeans, like the ones I'm wearing right now. A tenth amount of water is consumed by the average person in the span of 7 years. Also, according to the UN Conference on Trade and Development, the second most polluting industry in the world is the fashion industry, annually using up to 93 billion cubic meters of water, which is enough for 5 million people. Also, 500,000 tons of microfibers are being dumped into the oceans every single year. Not to mention all the dangerous chemicals that are used to produce our clothing that also pollute our waters. Number 4. Most of the time our clothing is produced in developing countries because it is cheaper for these massive brands and there are fewer regulations. And even if there are regulations, there is a lack of control to make sure that these regulations are being followed through. This means that these massive brands can get away with some pretty shady things. The goal of these big companies is to produce as much clothing as fast as possible and to achieve more profit. And to achieve that goal, they often push their employees to the limits and overwork them. Their employees often work for much longer than what these companies might tell you. Garment factory workers work long hours with no rest days for very low wages, in sometimes hazardous conditions. While there are regulations in most places of the world, the majority of these workers still have to work in places where the safety of their workplace is not guaranteed. These factories are also known as sweatshops. Unfortunately, garment factory workers sometimes have to work in unsafe buildings, such as the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, which collapsed, killing 1,134 people. Also, there are reports on abuse happening in some of these sweatshops around the world. But the thing is, when people start protesting the conditions of their workplace, their voices are rarely heard, and if the media calls out these companies on these issues, they will most likely hide the issues, and these companies will most likely move their factories to another country and the same problem continues. All of this tells us that there is a hidden price to the cheap clothing that is being offered to us. Nowadays, trends don't last very long. Brands are coming up with new lines almost every single week. We as customers buy much more clothing than we used to, and we buy much more clothing than we need. When we buy the clothing, we wear it for a while, but then very quickly the trend changes and it's no longer something we want to wear. So we either keep it buried in our closet or we throw it away. But throwing it away would mean more clothing into landfills, and we don't want that. So what can we do to help battle the fast fashion cycle? Here are just a few things that all of us can do to help battle the fast fashion industry. Number 1. Instead of throwing your old clothes away, try donating them to give them a new life, but keep in mind to donate clothing if it is still wearable and from good quality. You can also recycle your clothing if it's from recyclable fibers, or you can organize clothing swaps with your friends and family and exchange clothing with each other, or you can give it to secondhand stores and thrift shops. And another good idea is just saving up your clothes if they are still wearable, because trends come back all the time nowadays, so it might be something that you want to wear again. Number 2. Buying clothes from secondhand stores, also known as thrift shops, if there are any in your area. Number 3. Using the fabric from your old clothing to make useful everyday objects. This is your chance to get creative, basically. For example, I always take my old clothing and I turn it into cleaning rags. Number 4. Buying clothes from ethical brands is crucial, and the way to recognize if a brand is ethical is to do some research. Usually, ethical brands are very transparent on where they get their materials from, how their clothing is made, who makes their clothing, where it is made, and a lot of useful information that you need to know. Also, ethical brands don't have new lines as often as fast fashion brands. These are just a few signs that tell you that a brand is more ethical. Number 5. Less is more. Trends don't last very long nowadays, so don't try to follow them. Instead, try to follow your unique style and buy clothing that has a meaning to you and that is from good quality. That way you know you're gonna be wearing it and reusing it for a long time. Also, it is crucial that we stop treating shopping like therapy and that we stop our impulse to shop when we actually don't need to. Online shopping from ethical brands is also a good idea. However, certain items have to be tried on before they're bought. Otherwise, it is common that a lot of online bought items are being returned to the store after they are bought. And a big portion of these returned items end up in landfills. Also, we have to understand that not everyone's economic situation allows them to invest in a more sustainable closet. It is much more expensive to make clothes in an ethical way than it is in an unethical way. Also, fast fashion brands are everywhere nowadays, and ethical brands are outnumbered by them. Sometimes fast fashion brands are the only option. While you might not have the choice of which brands are most available and affordable to you, you always have the choice of how much clothing you're going to buy and what you're going to do with your clothing after you buy it. The first thing you have to make sure you're doing is that you're buying clothing that fits your unique style and that means something to you and that is from good quality. That way you know you're going to be wearing it for a long time. Also, there are still plenty of things everyone can do without having to spend any money at all to help battle the fast fashion cycle. When I was first doing research on this topic, I realized that I had been supporting fast fashion brands without even knowing. I was voting for a kind of world that I didn't want. And I'm sure that if all of us are careful with the decisions we make every single day when it comes to our clothing, that together we can achieve more than we can imagine. And I know that sounds very cliche, but we as customers owe it to the people who make our clothing. We have to use our votes for them, and we have much more power than we realize. Without the customers' money, these massive brands wouldn't even exist. We have to understand this power and use it. Thank you.